Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Shalom. Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Liberty and Friends here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. It is a good, hot, and balmy Durban evening. I hope you have a cold, if not ice cold, refreshing drink, because if anything, we're going to make it even hotter this evening. The Liberty and Friends being your week-ending news analysis show. Here we get the hardest interviews and the most compelling analysis that you will hear nowhere else. Welcome to it. As always, here on Liberty and Friends, I'm not alone. I'm, of course, joined by the friends, so to speak. So with that being said, before I actually bring the friends on, let me just do a very quick shout out to all of you who are donators, contributors to the show. You guys are literally helping the show slowly develop the sort of infrastructure, the tools, and of course that studio that we're looking to build. Again, I must thank you from the bottom of my heart. And maybe you're someone who's looking to become a contributor on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. I've always said this. We are building this show. We're building it as we fly, as I said. And with that being said, if you're looking to contribute to the BDL show, please have a look at the descriptor of this video to see exactly how you can contribute to the show. Other than that, your only price of admission is to hit that like button, whether you're watching on Facebook, Twitter, or on YouTube. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. With that being said, let me bring on the actual friends as I wipe sweat from my brow. Let me bring on the actual friends who come to us from all over the country. I'll begin with an absolutely brand new face. I'm talking, of course, about Marnus Kamfer. But come uit Afriforum. Marnus, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome, man. Good to have you. First time on the show. Maybe just tell the viewers very quickly what it is that you do at Afriforum.
Yeah, sure. Thank you once again for the opportunity. I am the head of their legal and risk department. So all of the legal stuff, all of the contract, all of the commercial stuff comes from me.
Fantastic. Once again, as I said, Marnus, very good to have you on the show. A face who is quite familiar here on Liberty and Friends is the head honcho over at a Manpatria podcast. Make sure you find them on their social media, including their website. And I'll let him tell you more about that. That is Dumo. Denga. Good evening, Dumo.
Good evening, Sihle. As always, it's great to be on, and I'm looking forward to having a great chat. And yes, guys, if you want to know more about Manpatria, just go to www.manpatria.com.
Absolutely, that is the Manpatria chats, and he's not alone, of course. He has his wingman, so to speak, with him, the co-hosts of the Manpatria podcast. I'll bring them both on screen. Koketso, Resane, there he is. Koketso, good evening.
Yeah, good evening, Sihle. Good evening to everyone who's watching. Everything Dumo said, check out manpatria.com, of course. Check out our podcast. But before you go ahead and do that, check us out right now with the good people over at Big Daddy Liberty's Liberty and Friends.
There you go. And as he says us, he is, of course, including his fellow co-host, Nzuzo, Khati. Nzuzo, good evening, bro.
Sawubona Sihle, Shafele, great to be on the show as always. Gonna have some great discussions, great interactions with the viewers. Thank you to the viewers for watching, and yeah, man, go check it out on Manpatria. Please, guys, we're gonna be there on tomorrow. Please join us on that live stream. But nonetheless, let's have a great show tonight. Thank you, Sihle.
Absolutely, that is, of course, Nzuzo Khati. But I said to myself, you know what? Let me add a little bit of flavor tonight. A face you have not seen for quite a while, but someone who is definitely a firm favorite here. That's, of course, Sara gone. There she is, from the Daily Friend and the IRR. Sara, good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, guests and co-panelists, or whatever the right term is. Should be fun.
Hey, man, Sara, on here, we're all friends, homie. So welcome to it. Welcome to the show. Guys, let's get straight into it because, again, I think there's quite a lot to chew on this week. It's been a relatively busy week, albeit it's been a very sort of low-intensity type news cycle, albeit a busy one. Marnus, with you being a new face on the show, I'm going to have to come to you first because your organization, Afriforum, took one leader of the third largest political party in South Africa, a red in tooth and claw communist party called the EFF. Julius Malema, you took him to court. Now, people will be wondering, oh my goodness, Julius Malema in court again? Almost like Gangstalicious if people catch that reference. But, he found himself in court again. This time, though, a very serious charge. Actually, I shouldn't say this time. The other charges, too, are quite serious. But in this instance, someone could have physically actually gotten hurt. Marnus, do you want to just unpack this for us?
Well, thank you. Before I continue with that specific case, we'd love to leave him alone. But for that to happen, he must stop breaking the law. If he continues breaking the law, then obviously it needs to be investigated, and it just can't be left by leaving him continuing with that specific stance he's taking at this stage. It's been a long wait. The original charges was laid by myself in 2018, and after lots of correspondence, lots of telephone calls, lots of pressure from us, at long last, the case started on Monday in the East London Regional Court. And like you said, quite serious charges. Everybody just sums it up and say it's a contravention of the Firearms Control Act. But if one goes a little deeper, you'll see the charges against him, the main charges in any event, is the first one is a contravention of section 3 of that act. And that is being in possession of a firearm without the necessary authorization. And that carries a 15-year sentence, according to the Firearms Control Act 60 of 2000. The second charge is possession of ammunition without the necessary authorization, which is a contravention of section 90 of the same act. And once again, you're looking at the maximum jail time of approximately 15 years if found guilty on that as well. And then one of the main charges, I believe, is the discharge of a firearm in a public or built-up area without good reason to do so, which is a contravention of section 120 subsection 7, and that carries a maximum prison time of 5 years. And then lastly, the reckless handling of a firearm without due consideration or disregard for the safety and property of other people, which is a contravention of section 120 subsection 3, and that also carries a maximum 5-year sentence. But which is quite interesting, and I'm going to walk away from the imprisonment periods, but I just want everybody to understand how serious it is. When you read Act 105 of 1997, it clearly states that there is also a minimum period where you must go to jail with regards to certain firearm offences. And one of those is being in possession or unlawful possession of a semi-automatic firearm. So it will be very interesting to see how this plays out. But from the onset, I must state, when we first came there on Monday, the EFF were there, all of the top brass, and they brought with them this huge security detail. Oh, and what bullies they was. They shoved court personnel. They just took over the place. So that was quite interesting to see. And once again, that's one of our great frustrations at Afriforum, is this absolute contempt that the EFF seem to have for all justice systems and the court itself. So it was a little frustrating. We started with a new prosecutor in the matter. We were a little skeptical about that, Ms. Smith leaving the prosecution a few weeks earlier. But taking into account, and that must be kept in mind as well, taking into account the immense pressure that these people need to work with in a high-profile case like this, and the ever-present live media that's around him, I was quite impressed with what the prosecutor did, and the magistrate was very capable and kept a cool head. So we're very impressed. Everything can happen in court. One never knows. It remains a court, but it's going well, and the state did well to start with the state's case and proving dooming evidence and leading witnesses to that effect, The first one being proving the whole chain of a cartridge casing that was found at the premises where this firearm was allegedly shot off. And from the person who found it, which was a cleaning lady, to the supervisor who received the cartridge casing, to the police who sealed it in front of them, to the police who took photos and so forth. So he did quite well in proving that chain. And obviously, the advocates for the defense, one needs to keep in mind that Julius Malema was accused number 1 in this matter, but there was also accused number 2, who's Adrian Snyder, who was his bodyguard, and I believe still is. And then their advocates attacked the state's case, say, yeah, how do you know the cartridge came from that rifle and that specific person? It could have come from anywhere else, and so forth and so forth. But unfortunately, that whole line of attack got blown out of the water by the witness just after that, who testified that he was able, with ballistic and forensic tests, to link that cartridge casing to a firearm that belongs to accused number 2, Mr. Adrian Snyman, who was Julius Malema's bodyguard at that stage. And then heat it up. So we're quite impressed. We knew from the beginning that a week was not going to be enough. I don't think the state is through a quarter of its case, and the matter was postponed to the 5th, to the 9th of September this year, case to continue, and for the state. And then Mr. Malema, Mr. Snyman would have the opportunity to rely on their defenses, which, my opinion, looks quite bleak at this stage, because they like to use the defense of blanks that was shot off, and the toy gun that was used in rhythm with fireworks. We'll see. It's going to be quite interesting, but a very eventful week, and we're very thankful that the case started, that the prosecution is doing well, that the police did well with regards to the investigation, and we'll keep monitoring the situation and be there at the next appearance.
Absolutely. And, even as you say this, Nzuzo, let me come to you, because, I think Marnus quite nicely laid out the toing and froing that that did happen, pardon me, in that courtroom. But there is a conversation to be had here, and really Marnus brings it out, in terms of perhaps, and I shouldn't say it's rare, but like in so far as how the South African Police Service are presented to us in the public. This particular police officer from the ballistics unit, absolutely exemplary work.
Yeah, man. It's not often that you hear stories about the justice system or officials in the justice system actually doing their job efficiently and properly, and actually showing some sort of effort in doing so. Unfortunately, that is the reputation that law enforcement officers have. But there are very much these type of officials that try their best. I see them a lot also in the legal aid sphere. Lawyers that actually try to help criminals that are actually in jail and having to await trial. And now I just heard, I heard, through the grapevine that an association is trying to take this matter to the constitution in terms of prisoners that have to await trial for years and years and get their time in front of the judge. And I'm happy to have seen the prosecutor, especially after having to be come in at such a time, it's such a late stage of the case, and to really be hitting on all fronts. Manus talks about the fact that even in this circumstances which the prosecutor finds himself in, which is a high profile case, a case that's very much publicized. The prosecutor is going for the right, the right places. Going for the ballistics report, he's going for the proper witnesses, and he's essentially putting up a good case against Malema. I didn't watch the whole thing, unfortunately, but I'm not aware. Was Malema also put on the stand as well? Because I did hear that he also tried to put the story that it was a toy gun to the judge, and I'm pretty sure the judge laughed at that and said, "This is not that cannot be a toy gun. But
Can you imagine Malema? Pew 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 pew. It was a toy you're on.
yeah, I can only imagine the things that Malema has said in the previous case. I wouldn't be surprised to hear such things. But yeah, man, we're happy to see officials in the justice system taking their job seriously. I just hope that it can change. As the time goes on, there's many things that need to change. We just seen, unfortunately, Ketla Sitole having to be his contract being terminated, and the police service is now in disarray. Well, it was already in disarray anyway, but nonetheless, this is worse. The top guy who's supposed to be leading the charge is nowhere there, is nowhere to be seen, and he's been terminated. Then you have an ass in the head minister who doesn't know what he's doing and just talks out of his ass, unfortunately. And to see these type of officials it puts a smile on the South Africans' face. At least they're taking their job seriously. But there's many things that needs to be done. Let's give this guy his props, but there's many things that need to be done to be fixed in the justice system. We're talking
Absolutely.
about DNA. Yeah.
Sorry. Sorry, I have a little bit delay on my side. My apologies for that. Dumo, even as we speak about this case, there's three nested features that I want to unpack, and I want to put one to you and the other two to my remaining guests who haven't had their opening statements. There is something to be said here, Dumo, about one Teflon Don that is Malema, who seemingly with impunity can go around the country allegedly breaking one law after the other, whether it's seemingly stealing from VBS grannies or allegedly, sprouting hate speech in various cases, including, openly calling that, he doesn't know if he'll call for the slaughter of white people, at least for now. That sort of rhetoric that is endemic in a one Julius Malema. There's this air, if you will, Dumo, of impunity that a cloak of impunity, if I can steal from the Harry Potter the rhetoric that he wears, where he walks around invisible to the law. And if anything, it seems in this case, someone's about to pull that cloak off and say, yeah, we've got you a jail.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's the mentality that he has, really, is that I think that he feels that he is untouchable, and that and what he has done as a way to kind of ensure that, or at least try to ensure that rather, is that he'll say that, well, anyone who tries to go after him, it's due to racism and so forth. And I mean, you also in I think 2 weeks ago, where in the EFF hate speech trial, where he was always talking about how he's a victim of racism and everything like that. And again, it's like he lacks empathy. He can't see that there are people who have pain and so forth. But again, with him, the whole world revolves around him. And this is, I think now that we're seeing what's happening with Malema, I think what we're going to see, and I think Malema's going to learn a very hard lesson. I think that if the cases don't go in his favor, he's probably going to learn the hard way that, listen, you're not as untouchable as you think you are. Just because your heroes who are Stalin and Lenin and so forth probably did not see justice, it doesn't mean that you won't. And I think that's the problem. I think he thinks that he's this guy in this superhero movie who can't do no wrong. He's the good guy, and we've seen what happens in the superhero movie. You'll see some YouTubers even assess some of these superheroes and say, was that the right thing to actually do? But because he thinks he's the good guy and he can't do no wrong, I mean, if that's the case, then clearly he thinks he can't do any wrong. And therefore he will do the morally reprehensible acts and think that he's doing the right thing. And that's why he even said he will not rule out killing, he wouldn't rule out calling for the slaughtering of white people, which is very concerning in my opinion.
Sara, even as I come to you, there's still some nested legal features that I want to unpack here. And one is the psyche, that the rhetoric and the climate that political parties like the EFF create let me be precise and specific. Here is a previous prosecutor, pardon me, who literally says, look, I'm not interested in taking this case on for two discernible reasons. And I'm not saying I agree with them, I'm just making the argument here, and I want you to unpack it for me. It says, this man creates a climate of racial hatred, which will see his supporters descend on me for doing my job. And I'm not interested in that if the NPA or the state won't protect me as a prosecutor. That seems to be the broad argument she made, and she was rebuffed by the NPA throughout this. Now, again, I'm not taking a position on this. I just want to get your particular thoughts on this. Is there something to be said about effectively Malema, on the one hand, with rhetoric, whittling down the institutions of state, and of course with actual violence, as we've seen, instilling that culture of fear and perpetuating that impunity that he seems to think he has?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem for the prosecutor concerned is that he has basically set a whole modus operandi through the way he speaks politically, the way he speaks in court, the way he speaks about things. Everything is intended to generate fear and loathing. So basically, even before you enter into combat with him, you're anticipating that he's going to make life difficult. It's, you can debate it a million ways as to whether one has to just be very tough about it, and know that this is his strategy and this is how he does things. The only problem is, of course, is that the EFF has a reputation for going beyond just the rhetoric. And essentially, the only thing you got to do with the EFF is essentially to stare them down. In other words, the prosecutor in charge of this particular case must go through it all the way. The magistrate must manage proceedings well and firmly. And the state has to be prepared to take action if violence breaks out. They can't sit back and wait for cliques to be hollowed out, as happened in previous occasions. There's unfortunately no other way to deal with violence, given the threats of violence, other than to actually stand up against them and see it down, sort of stare it down for once and for all. It has to happen.
Absolutely. And again, Koketso, even as I say this, and I'm going to sound controversial, so actually I won't. Maybe I won't. Look, someone like Julius Malema, I think, obviously based on evidence, facts, the data. So I'm not just saying this because, he doesn't like Julius. No. But if he's found guilty, someone like Julius Malema actually has to begin to face the music so that it begins to instill that sense of actually the rule of law does matter in South Africa, and it doesn't matter who you are.
Yeah, it goes exactly with what Dumo was saying, that he behaves like someone who has some form of impunity. And yeah, perhaps maybe a psychologist can come and confirm this to us, that, the man genuinely does think that he is above reproach, and he goes on time after time, like Marnus said, effectively committing crimes, and no one ever dares put him to book. In an ideal world, the NPA gets involved, and it doesn't take a civil society organization to actually ask that the NPA does its job. Unfortunately, that's not what's happening. But I just want to mention one thing here, in that, we have a prevailing problem of political violence in this country. People who are active politically, especially those who are somehow elected into office or into high positions somehow, there are parts of the country where they actually lose their lives over this. And Julius isn't helping the situation, because his act, not only is it criminal for him to fire that gun as he did, and as Manus also mentioned, right, but it also kind of rubber stamps to society that once there's politics involved, you have to have high caliber weapons at your side. You have to have a security detail that is ready to shoot and has live rounds, etc., etc. And that doesn't paint our politics particularly in a positive light, if I can put it like that. But maybe to close off as well, is I like what Manus said there, in that Manus is able to, on his platform like this, actually come out and cite parts of the constitution that have actually been contravened by events that have actually happened. You don't see much of the same sort of behavior from Julius Malema or the EFF at large. And that to me tells us that either A, they either don't know the law they are defending themselves with, or B, they know that they are in the wrong, and so don't actually look at the law as a benchmark, but rather, go and fetch other things to use as a defense from that deep, unending pool of atrocities such as, racism and etc. and that sort of thing. So, yeah, kudos to Marnus actually for just sensitizing us around that. That this is in the Constitution, and at the end of the day, the President, Julius Malema, we are subject to this, and the even hand of the law needs to apply to everyone, and not just the ordinary citizen like you and I, but even to a sitting member of parliament and the head of the third biggest political party in the country.
Absolutely. And with that being said, we've just hit that 30-minute mark here on the BDL show. Welcome to it. You're watching, of course, Liberty and Friends. As we do every week, the Friends panel will help us unpack the news week that was. This week, we're joined by Marnus Kamfer, who's, of course, from Afriforum. Shout out to him, of course, and him joining us for the first time on the show. Dumo Denga, host of the Manpatria show. There he is over there. Koketso, Resane, and Nzuzo, Khati, his co-hosts from the Manpatria show. Make sure you head over to their website and you get some of their merch too. Nice stuff on the Manpatria podcast, pardon me. And of course, Sara Khan, Sara Khan from the Daily Friend. Welcome to it. Remember, guys, all you need to do as you're watching, hit that like button. We have a very nice audience growing at that. Do me a favor, please. Hit that like button and help me spread the show to a wider audience. Welcome to it. Guys, I'm going to move us on a little bit in conversation. And, I want to get it out the way, only because it's, I don't know how to put this. It's going to be an ongoing issue, of course, and it is one that's dominating global headlines, not just South African ones, but the Ukraine and, of course, Russia. What's happening there, the latest developments in what is effectively coming a full-on war, effectively. I mean, earlier on, we just sort of saying things like, oh, it's a conflict because it's in isolated areas here and there. And it seemed as if the international community would jump in at some stage and this would be settled diplomatically. That now ever increasingly seems not to be the case, with Putin doubling down and literally going all in. Marnus, I want to come to you on this. I don't know what your thoughts have been on this so far. One of the things that's really played out this week is one Vladimir Zelensky, the president of the Ukraine, donning his armored vest, telling people to get armed and to hit the streets, make Molotov cocktails, and to face the Russians. But what are the prospects really of any of this yielding any results?
I'm not an expert in the area, but I'm going to give you my thoughts.
Sure.
Russia had this kind of war with what I need to watch my words, but a weaker nation at that stage in 1979 in Afghanistan. And it didn't bode well for them. And the people they fought against simply knew the terrain. They did not have very grand technological weapons, but they stood their ground. And America had their own, Russia had its own Vietnam in Afghanistan. And that tends to happen with these superpowers. They underestimate their enemies and they start the invasion force. And then it never goes as quickly as they wanted to go, and unfortunately, then it escalated. And I watched the United Nations session where the ambassador from Ukraine stated and said, "Here is what's happening in my country. We want the West to act," and so forth. And just after him, the Russian ambassador spoke, and he had a whole other argument. Stating that they're simply protecting Russian nationals in the Ukraine that's been bullied by Ukraine for several years. And so it's quite interesting. We're sitting with a situation here where the Western media is dominating, I think, with regards to what's happening. I don't think Russia is trying very hard to actually give their side of the story on social media or mainstream media. But Afriforum will obviously, we're going to focus on the problems in South Africa and where we can sort other problems in South Africa for us to take a stance with regards to Russia is wrong or Russia is right, or Ukraine is wrong or Ukraine is right. I don't think it's our place in that regard. That is something for the government to do, and the frustration the government they have, I presume, is they were supported by Russia, the ANC, they were supported by Cuba, and it seems like a little bit of payback time. They need to support Cuba where they can, and I think Russia is expecting the same from them, in my opinion.
Well, let me come to you, Koketso, pardon me, because again, you've been tweeting quite vociferously on this issue the entire week, and I say vociferously only because I've chosen to sort of blank out of this topic, and yours and a few other people's tweets are who I've been following. I think there's something to be said here. Two things I'm going to put to you, Koketso. I think there's something to be said here about the narratives war. It is a low-intensity war that is happening simultaneously to the actual physical combat in the Ukraine at the moment. There are two discernible sides, each claiming to hold a moral high ground, each scolding you if you don't necessarily believe or take on their particular talking points. But the Ukrainian or pro-Ukrainian side really being the loudest voice in the room, to the extent where something like Russia Today, a state-owned, Russia's version of the SABC to an extent, even being deplatformed from various news channels, including now recently DSTV. What's going on here, Koketso? Are we being dribbled?
Yeah, big asterisk again. I'm a bit like others in that I'm not a qualified expert, but again, I do have many opinions on this and many other things, of course. Look, I mean, for me, the first question to ask is why ban Russia Today? Why is it so critically essential for Russia Today to be banned? And the answer is simple. It's because they don't want an alternative narrative being publicized, actually. So much pressure has been put on global bodies to just make sure that Russia Today is silenced and that outside the borders of Russia, it is near inaccessible, that you really have to troll and rely on internet for you to get any semblance of opposing narrative. And again, we've seen this before, this kind of taking over of a narrative quite recently with a certain virus, of course. So it's the same kind of playbook, and for me, that's really a red flag. In that, if there's always only one version of the truth, right? And so that version of the truth, the single one, can only stand on its own. And if you're having to aid it or help it by actually blocking out all dissent, that means something is up. So there's a big question to be asked there. But yeah, on this whole thing, I think there's quite a lot. Every day we hear of something new, etc. So it's quite difficult to keep track of everything. But I'll just maybe deviate a bit to the latest to come out, and that is the U.S. Embassy asking South Africa to actually pick a side, to effectively pick a side. And I think it's important that they actually did that, because the messaging out of cabinet, out of Ramaphosa, out of the South African executive was to kind of, try to play both sides, while at the same time deciding to sit back at the UN vote on imposing a no-fly zone, for example. And I like that they did this, because even as citizens, I don't think we know where our government stands. We know we have relations with Russia in terms of BRICS, whatever you make of it. It is nothing more than an economic bloc, of course. And the economic bloc comes into the forefront when it comes to sanctions being levied upon Russia, and that you could expect that they would rely on their economic bloc partners at the very least to facilitate trade. So it's important that the US Embassy is actually asking this sort of question, while at the same time putting pressure on our government that they need to have a clear stance, because we are quite dependent on the United States. They are our third biggest trading partner, I think behind China and Germany, if I'm not mistaken, with the UK coming fourth. But yeah, the US is our third biggest trading partner. They send us a hell of a lot of money, facilitate a hell of a lot of our trade as well. But over and above that, the US government particularly is responsible for much of the South African government's social welfare programs. The big one here is how the US government is actually sponsoring antiretroviral treatment for HIV patients or those afflicted with HIV and AIDS. Much of that is sponsored by the USA government. We get it free of charge as South Africa, of course. But yeah, they want to know that are we giving or are we helping people who in effect aren't on our side. Then there's some other things in there as well that American firms do, and the American government, they do fund quite a few South African organizations in terms of clinical trials, etc. Everything from HIV to tuberculosis to malaria, which is to the benefit of the continent at large and not just South Africa. So it is important that they've asked this question, and it does kind of put our government in a corner, and they need to answer this question. The last thing I want to mention as well is how, there's this global effort really to freeze out Russia as a country out of global finance system. It started, of course, with SWIFT, which is effectively under the control of the US government. But now we're seeing MasterCard, Visa coming to the table and also deciding to impose some form of sanction or as private businesses not serve the entire Russian territory. You have large software houses coming out and saying that they will not be accepting purchases from Russia. That is, they're putting their money where their mouth is and deciding to pick a side. And the big question I have around this is normally when this sort of thing gets done, it's because there is a resolution typically from the UN that says we are imposing sanctions at large on a particular economy or a particular territory. Then private industry tends to follow suit, compelled by law, of course, to not facilitate trade. This time around, that hasn't happened yet, but you've got companies coming out and picking a side without the bureaucratic pressure to do so. And you have to then ask yourself, right, maybe this is why it's so important for those at the top to control the narrative. Again, I'm not saying I'm particularly pro-Russia or pro-Ukraine. I'm just saying that I don't like how particularly Russia is being treated in this instance. It would have been a lot better to have the Russian voice or the Russian perspective really going out there for the rest of us to make of it what we will. And at the end of the day, it doesn't help anyone unless you've got a stake in actually being, seeing Ukraine coming out on top of this, which we know by now is, the large majority of those in control of NATO, that is.
Even as you say this, Koketso, and Sara, I want to come to you. And I must openly state this. I'm not pro-Russia. Equally, I'm not pro-Ukraine. If anything, I care more about this country and its people, that is South Africa, than necessarily what's happening overseas. Of course, we will discuss this issue only insofar as it's an international one that affects the world. But what I am really skeptical of is the inability of some people to be able to say the invasion by Russia into Ukraine is reprehensible and it must be condemned and something must be done about it. But equally, the Ukraine itself is not some angelic, perfect world nation. It's a corrupt arse end of a NATO agenda that we're seeing play out in Europe. And that is possibly, pardon why, exactly why we're seeing this conflict happen in the first place. The Ukraine is a client state. It's not really a country in my view. It's a client state of the US State Department. And again, it doesn't surprise me that we're seeing a conflict play out in this part of the world. With that being said, do the Ukrainians deserve to be attacked by the Russians, civilian casualties and the like? No, of course not. I'm not saying that. Equally, as Koketso rightly raises, and this is why I want to jump in with you, Sara, do Russian citizens, as citizens who have nothing to do, effectively, with the decisions taken by their leaders, do they deserve to be punished as they're being punished by the likes of MasterCard, Visa, the US imposing sanctions that affect mostly ordinary Russian citizens by the looks of things? What's going on here, Sara?
I think the problem is that if, as NATO, for a range of reasons, can't commit to engaging in military warfare, essentially the bans that have arisen around the financial bans, economic bans, is essentially warfare by different means. And the problem, of course, is it doesn't matter who the aggressor and who the victim is. The people of both countries do not deserve whatever may happen to them as a result of either. Interesting, I heard a commentator today talking about an English commentator in Russia saying that, interestingly, the reliance on television by its people has not diminished much over the years, unlike, say, for example, most countries in the West, even here, where we rely on social media for a lot of, and the internet for a lot of our information, the majority of Russians still rely on state media. So they will tend to have they will have almost exclusively a government view on what is happening, and they're taking it, which is different, obviously, to Ukraine and the West. So the tragedy there may well be that things may or may not go well or badly for the Russians, but the Russian people will probably only find out through the economic sanctions, or when their sons who are soldiers do not come back from that war. But on the other hand, you look at Russia bombing parts of cities. They're not being strategic. They are bombing civilian areas. They're not being careful about it. I heard one commentator say that it's actually a not particularly good army. It's just big, and that is its strength. And it's always a tragedy for the people who are not in politics and not running the war.
You know, Sara, even as you say that, and Nzuzo, I want to throw it to you, and I will come back to you, Marnus, in a second, because I saw you nodding quite a bit there. I don't know if you want to have a say, but I'll come to you in a moment. It does have to be said, Nzuzo, that there is and again, I asked this question of you, and I put it to you guys, not because I assume you are experts in military science, no, but just an opinion. It does seem as though the invasion by Russia is quite clumsy at best. You know, and I say this with a pinch of salt. I know I'm going to get eviscerated in the comment section by people who served in the military. I'm like, oh, they're not clumsy, Big Daddy. You don't know what you're talking about. But there has to be something to be said about a nation as powerful as Russia, which clearly thought, that is, Putin clearly thought that this would be a rollover. You know, maybe 2-3 days tops, and you'd be done. For instance, his pincer move of coming from the south, coming from the north, in trying to encircle Kiev, clearly not working, insofar as the Ukrainians putting up quite a fierce fight. I'll go one step further, and I sort of opened with this, and I want to get your views, Nzuzo, because there's a nested feature in this comment. President Zelensky, Ukrainian president, openly declaring two things. One, every resident of Kiev, and I believe the country broadly, effectively a Second Amendment. If you want a rifle in order to fight the Russians, by goodness, come through to your local military depot. You can pick up whatever the case may be, and fight the Russians. Suddenly, liberal media, and I say liberal in the American sense of leftist media, applauding that, even though locally in America, they were sort of the first to say, oh, the Second Amendment is barbaric and blah, 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 blah. Talk to me about that. The second element, of course, is that same Zelensky calling for international fighters, if they're keen, to join his foreign legion in that part of the world. Your thoughts on this conflict and those two areas?
Yeah, CK. Just I also want to, preface this by saying that I'm not an expert in military. But, I actually looked at some of the stats a couple of days ago in terms of the casualties that are being suffered by Russia. And it seems as though more than 10,000 troops have already been killed as a result of this war. And a lot of military, artillery, as well as military systems are taking a hit in favor of the Ukrainians. So it seems as though Russia didn't think this through. It seems as though it was the day before that they actually thought, let's just invade these guys, rather than thinking to themselves, how are we going to do it? I think that it's always a bad move for war. At the end of the day, we don't want nobody to go to war unless it's really necessary, and you're never really waiting. You never really know what you can see on the other side. It seems as though your Ukrainian army, as well as the people that they've actually enlisted, in terms of the young and old, as well as if there are any foreign fighters, it seems that they are putting up a fight. It seems like it's difficult for Russia to actually get into Kiev and actually take over the capital. But I don't think he's going to actually pull back. I think that Putin is of the belief that he's quite close to Kiev, even though it could take quite some time to actually take over the capital. But who knows? We will see. They might actually take a loss and have to pull back. But man, I just think that it's not this war is not necessary. But let's see how it goes, man.
Yes, Dumo. let me bring you in here. Marnus, I know I did say I'll come to you, but I want to just throw something to Dumo. Maybe it's a penultimate point before we move on. Dumo, I often say on the show, hashtag don't be dribbled. And the reason I say this is often people, when they analyze politics, they forget that politics is all about appearances versus reality. The appearance right now is the whole Russia versus Ukraine thing and what the mainstream media, the corporate media are feeding us. But the reality, perhaps, are the machinations, the movement behind this, which speak to a broader trend. We've seen with the spicy cough a concerted effort by political elites to assert themselves as having the ability to control all aspects of society when they deem it fit, based on an emergency or whatever the case may be. And of course, that definition will expand itself to even outside of an emergency. Hey, deal with it. This is what we saw with the spicy cough. And I call it the spicy cough for those who are wondering, because I can't say the actual word, we get demonetized here on social media. We're seeing, as I said, the political elites give themselves these powers. Some of these powers do more. It's clearly the ability to choose who can and can't transact in a society, who is and who isn't part of a formal society that has services that are needed. I did raise the issue of MasterCard and Visa shutting off the Russians. I did raise the issue of SWIFT, the SWIFT system, the banking system being shut off to that part of the world. But let's face it, Dumo, if these elites wanted to, they could do that to people who they effectively disagree with.
Yeah, they can. I think this is one of those things that we should be wary of. I mean, we saw what happened in Canada as well with the Emergencies Act when Justin Trudeau invoked it, and then guess what happened? They actually went after people that was.
Oh,
sorry about that. Can you hear me?
That was my fault. My bad. Yes,
okay,
but you're making that point. We saw it in Canada.
Yeah, we saw it in Canada, definitely. And I think we should be very wary of that situation, because at the end of the day, you know, if these corporates can do it to people, and now they're doing it to Russia and so forth, we should be very concerned. Also, what Sara mentioned earlier when she said that this is, you know, when you lay sanctions, this is just warfare by another means. I agree with that. And I think we should also look at how we can actually end the war. So I read an article that suggested that perhaps one way to end the war is for Ukraine to sell the disputed territories to Russia. Now, again, this is not my idea. It's actually an idea that was brought by Thibault Serlet. I think it's a decent idea, but again, I do understand that it could receive some resistance in the sense that it might look like it's some Neville Chamberlain coming back from the dead and trying to appease Russia. But I think ultimately, if that is one way to end the war, it should be considered, because at the end of the day, I mean, you're sending young people to fight the wars of politicians, and you know, and they're sacrificing their lives for it. So I think now at this point in time, we should rather focus on trying to end it. And again, if we don't try to focus on ending it, we just have more and more sanctions. And when these sanctions pile up, I mean, it's going to affect other innocent people along the way as well. So, you know, let's look at that. Let's try to end this. And, you know, the sanctions are one thing. But look, I mean, let these guys come to the table and negotiate and have a workable solution. Because at the end of the day, we don't need more people dying.
You know, again, I must agree with you on that last point. Guys, I don't know if anybody else wants to have a bite of this cherry, but there is something to be said. I want us to just give us a little bit of attention. You know, there's a danger here, guys. We're seeing politicians almost on the one hand lose control of populations because of technology. Let me be precise. For instance, yes, Russia shut off from the international financial system, but you have the institutions like Bitcoin, technology such as crypto broadly, that are actually allowing many people to be able to transact outside of that formal system. And the Russians themselves, and the Chinese in particular, let me bring them in here, saying actually maybe it is time that we create an alternative financial model that ropes in crypto, that ropes in creating alternative SWIFT-like systems, and of course payment systems like MasterCard and Visa. Koketso. We're almost seeing a realignment here and maybe this is the part no one wants to talk about. We're seeing a realignment of global power and its exercise, and perhaps even the Americans' power base and their projection of power waning.
Yeah, central planning, right? I think all of us here are well aware of the dangers of central planning. What's actually happening now is this is central planning at a bigger level, beyond a single state, where you've got collective states then coming together and deciding then to central plan the entire globe at large. And it's doomed to fail for as long as you have, very large populous nations who are willing to basically push back. I mean, let's not forget that officially Russia is the biggest country in the world in terms of geography, and then China is the biggest in the world in terms of population. Those two together do have quite a bit of clout, and they're both in the northern hemisphere, of course, but they can provide some semblance of intense resistance, I would say, to the status quo. And should they go ahead and do that, I believe that it'll quite typically shake up things quite a bit. But I like that you mentioned that there are alternatives out there that states have been very reluctant to embrace, particularly your bigger, more established states. Of course, we're not talking about the little guy who then decides to adopt crypto as a national competency here. But yeah, I mean, if Russia, together with China and a few others, definitely go in this direction, it will actually shake up the world and create an us versus them, even right down to how we trade. This, I believe, this only ends in one way, and that is the way that the market will then decide. That is, if people like you and me then decide to explore more the one instead of the other, then that would effectively decide who wins the war in the end. But the lines are definitely being drawn, and Russia is being forced to pick a side, and China is basically thinking, hey, hang on a minute. Last time we were far from being in a position to have a definitive say here, but since things are changing, and given the position of China right now as a country and an economy, if they have an opportunity right now to be at the tip of the spear in terms of changing how global finance works, I think they're going to go ahead and take it and then offer a credible threat again to the status quo. This time around, think of it sort of as a Cold War, but in the global monetary system, where China gets to be the guy with the biggest gun, given that Russia has actually been had its wings clipped a little bit here. So yeah, I think they're going to go ahead and take it. What does that mean for the rest of the world? Well, if China does become the tip of the spear in terms of creating a new global financial system, I think Africa will be very quickly incentivized, and much of Latin America, I think they'll be very quickly incentivized to actually go along with what China is proposing here, which, let's not forget, could create some form of headache for the Northern Hemisphere, as much of the world's resources outside of oil does reside in the Southern Hemisphere, of course. But yeah, let's see how it actually plays out. I know the crypto guys are licking their lips, but for you and I, we still have a stake in, in the fiat currency market right now. So yeah, it is scary stuff, but where there's a will, there's a way, I guess.
You are watching Liberty and Friends here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. I'm in conversation with the fellas from Manpatria. That's with Dumo, Denga, Koketso, Resane, and of course, Nzuzo, Khati. You can see them on screen there. Make sure you find them, of course, on their social medias. Their show comes to you on a Monday, and they have a website, of course. Sara from The Daily Friend. Also, there she is joining us tonight. We welcome her. And, of course, the Institute of Race Relations that she is a part of. And, of course, Marnus Kamfer, who is a new face here on the show. Very welcome to him, who's, of course, from Afriforum. Guys, before I move us on from this topic, because really we're in the last 30 minutes effectively of the show, I've been watching, Nzuzo makes this point of the lines have clearly been drawn on this issue, and people are very vehement on each side of it. And each of them demand that you see this topic their way, otherwise you're a bad person. In fact, I've already been accused on social media of being a Russian asset, comrade. So I'm literally getting them Russian rubles, albeit it's declined by 40% in its value, and the Russian stock market by 90%. So I'm clearly broker now as a Russian asset than a supposed agent for white monopoly capital. Guys, there's something to be said here, perhaps, as just to conclude this, and I don't know who to throw it to. Marnus, I don't know if you want to bite at the cherry at all on this topic again, but the one thing I want to throw to the panel, I'm frightened when I look at the global stage. And I left that last question on purpose insofar as the waning power, perhaps, or at least the perception of the waning power of US influence, whether it's soft power or the overt threat of the US, putting boots on the ground. There is something to be said here about US allies who are maybe looking at the situation and thinking, yeah, maybe these chaps aren't going to defend us when the doo-doo hits the fan. And with us seeing this partnership and coalition slowly develop between China and Russia, I know the Taiwanese will be very worried at this particular point. Sara, let me throw it to you. And if anybody wants on this one, please just notify me in the private chat.
Yeah, I think one mustn't write off America too easily. Notwithstanding Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, it's still the biggest army in the world, and it's effective and it's effectively trained. I think the other thing was the surprise. I think the surprise that Russia got in this invasion was it completely misread the extent to which the countries of the West would actually band together as quickly as they did and as vehemently as they did. I really don't think they expected that. And I just want to make one point. It's actually a little off topic, but I just want to make a point about Ukraine because people. I read one comment that said, the Russians aren't going in that hard because they want to keep the people on side that they're going to govern or rule over. Make no mistake, the Ukrainians loathe the Russians, and there are long historical reasons for it. I mean, if you want a complicated, messy history, that part of the world is it. But from its absorption by the USSR and the creation of the man-made famine under Stalin in the 30s, the Holodomor, which resulted in the death of, the amounts vary, but say about 5 million people who were essentially starved to death because he wanted to create collective farms, and the peasantry had been used to owning and running their own farms, and embarked on a system of starvation to bring them to heel. So the enmity there is very, very strong, and that's partly would explain the vehemence of the seeming defense and antagonism, and I think again there was one comment that Ukraine is just a sort of satellite of the USA. I think that's underestimating the Ukraine with all its problems, and as the speakers have said, it's hugely corrupt. But then so is Russia. It has neo-Nazis. So does Russia. Anti-Semitism. So does Russia. I mean that part of the world is mired in all of those social ills. So in that sense, there's a lot behind it that the what the West is or is not doing does not even begin to cover.
I'm a little stupefied for words here, and I don't see anybody chipping in the private chat, so I want to move us on in a moment. But maybe as a final thought, even as I'm watching the comment section fire up with people with this topic, because it's so emotive for a lot of people. Some people have transitioned from being pro-shut down everything, spicy cough, to being pro-Ukraine. And if you don't listen to us, you're a Nazi, you're a Russian sympathizer, blah, 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 blah. The importance of being able to be critical in your analysis of what's happening in front of you politically, I feel as though it's being lost in this moment. And the spicy cough period of lockdowns and effectively the trust me, bro, sentiment that the politicians have been pushing, it has done so much damage to people who before would have looked at what Putin is doing, invading Ukraine, and said, that's bad. But equally would have looked at Ukraine and said, that is a corrupt state that has had problems before this invasion, including a low-intensity civil war between effectively Ukraine and the Donbass region, generally speaking. There are issues here. There are so many moving parts that for me, it's very dangerous for anybody who takes a side and then takes a moral high ground. I don't know what word to insert there. but effectively then looks down at everybody else, even as we say, guys, be careful that you're not dribbled in a situation where there's a lot of nuance. That's my 2 cents on this. And of course, we'll keep an eye on this topic in the coming weeks. I'll bring on people who are, in their own respects, actual experts on this issue from a military side and, of course, on the politics in that region. Guys, let me move us on. As we're in the final 30 minutes, I did mention of the show. A topic that I want us to really chew on, and I smile a little bit here because it's become such an issue. There is a growing, seemingly, anti-foreigner sentiment in South Africa on the one hand, and with it being anti-foreigner, either A, it'll put a mask on of being anti-illegal immigration in order to come across as PC and approachable, or outwardly just say, you know what, a South African exceptionalism, South Africa for South Africans, hashtag put South Africans first. It's become so dangerous that it plays itself out in various civic organizations that have formed. One Operation Dudula coming to mind, led by a young chap named Unkasha Lux, if I'm pronouncing his surname properly. I don't know if it's Luk or Lux. That's the thing about being Nguni. You never know. As I said, plays itself in civil society. But now the politicians are beginning to follow, of course, because they see votes in this. Koketso, I'll come to you. Firstly, your impression of what we're seeing and Operation Dudula and its populist message. Is it another coin of a EFF type populism?
So I do give Operation Dudula, Put South African First, etc. I do give them quite a bit of slack for the sole reason that they are not political parties. That is, they didn't even, maybe with the exception of Mario Kumalo and a couple of others, the large majority of them didn't even run for municipal office in the recent elections either. So I give them the slack because I think at the core of what they're looking to achieve is, they're simply saying that, guys, if you're going to come into the country, do so legally. And then you've got another chorus of people that are saying, don't just come in legally, but come in and offer a scarce skill, which is a separate but parallel conversation entirely, of course. But yeah, I give them that slack. They're saying that when you, I'll make an example, right? Well, on my current passport, I've got quite a few Botswana stamps. For me to go to Botswana, I drove through the border more than a few times. I flew in a few times, and each time I did that, I went through immigration. And I went through immigration. They asked me questions. I abide by the laws of that country. I remember driving into Botswana with a car that didn't even have license plates. I drove in with a temp, and I got stopped by cops while I was in the capital over in Botswana, of course. Did I experience any, negative animosity or etc.? No, I didn't. Why? Because I came in legally. I'm able to produce a passport that says, right, I came in on this day. I said I'd be here for this much time, and then when I went back home, no one bothered me. So effectively, this what is sometimes termed as an anti-foreigner movement, I think it's misplaced. They're simply saying that, right, you can be an immigrant, etc., but come through the border legally. Don't come in through, don't come in through the corner or in the height of the night by crossing a river, etc. Just do so legally, because if I go to your country, you'd expect me to do the same. And then of course there's a parallel argument after that where people then say, no, we shouldn't have borderless. We should have a borderless Africa. That borders are actually an imperial construct, result of colonialism, etc. And they quickly forget that, but even in the absence of colonialism, there is still that principle of respect your neighboring tribe's border. That is, you don't just get to do what you want on their land. Otherwise, there are dire consequences. And this is, of course, how wars are typically fought. So, I think it's misplaced. At the end of the day, they're just asking that people do so legally instead of coming in as undocumented, etc. And then, which leads to a host of other issues. One of which is when a lot of illegal foreigners actually do crime. A lot of them, they can't even get processed properly, for example. So how do you actually even put people to book that don't even have documentation for you to effectively put them through your own justice system? So there's a host of issues in there, but I do give these organizations a little bit of slack because I agree with the core principle that if you go to another country, go through immigration, respect their laws, and if you won't do that, then you're no more than a criminal and you should be treated as such.
Well, I'm going to play devil's advocate here because I think this panel, broadly speaking, has a very particular slant on this issue. But let me not preempt that, except to say I will outwardly play a devil's advocate on this particular issue. And the pushback to this Koketso, and I'll throw it to Sara, is someone like a Julius Malema would say, well, actually, we're black and we're black African. And as Koketso rightly said, we've been victims of 300 plus years of colonialism and slavery and the like. And we've been told by the evil white man that we should put up these border fences between us. But that's my African brother who's crossing the Limpopo River, and cutting down a chicken wire fence to enter South Africa. He deserves to be here. And there's no difference really insofar as a South African citizen and an African citizen. In fact, Sara, I'll put it to you that as a Pan-Africanist, I would say, I would rather see white South Africans be pushed out of the country and more African brothers brought in. Not this, suggesting anything other than this, it makes you xenophobic.
And then there's reality. And essentially, I mean, what's patronizing about Julius Malema's position on this is that he's making the sort of broad assumption he'd accuse everybody else of making, and that is that because you're black and you live in Africa, you're the same, that you're not dealing with different groups of people, different nations, different societies, different cultures, etc., etc. And Africa has a huge variety. That's just the one point. The other point is that for better or for worse, we have nation states. The world operates on the basis of nation states. And many of those nations were created as nations by colonial powers, and not just in Africa. But the point is that the globalization, the way the world works and interacts with each other, that nation state scenario is unavoidable, and it becomes important, and it becomes part of our zeitgeist that we do identify with a country, which means that whatever our resources we have to spend on our citizens become put under pressure when people from outside of the country come over, and very often they'll come over for the best of reasons, and usually it's because of some form of political or economic deprivation, and they're looking for a better life. I mean, that's partly what some of Ukraine and Russia are about. And the problem is that when you have such a lousy economic environment as we do because of government policy, you are stretching very thin resources even thinner. And that is a classical historical occasion when xenophobia will develop. So it requires two things. I'm not sure which is the more difficult. The one is a growing economy, and the other is proper border control. And I'm afraid from that point of view, the government has the most to answer for.
And yes, Dumo, as I continue to play this role of devil's advocate, we in the classical liberal libertarian community often have to deal with similar notions of this type. And I want to get your view on this. But Dumo, I'm a libertarian, and we libertarians believe that the world should have actually open borders. Why should there be restrictions on movement? Ultimately, we often say the state is an evil entity. Why do we then allow it to enforce these arbitrary boundaries when people should have a freedom of movement, Dumo?
Right. That's a very good question. I think I was actually doing some research on this, and there is a growing number of libertarians who believe that we should have decent border control due to the idea of freedom of association as well. So they argued by saying that, well, because if you look at my own house, I have a border around it and everything like that, or walls or whatever. They believe that even countries as well should have the same thing. So they believe that states should also have freedom of association. But of course, this is a very fringe view. It's very new. It's coming to the fore. It's not necessarily established like many libertarians. Because I know a lot of my libertarian friends are big on open borders. So, they're in favor of open borders for many different reasons. They believe it'll be actually better for a country to do so. But I think, the reason why this anti-foreigner rhetoric is also becoming a bit problematic is because our government is making it difficult for their own citizens to take advantage of the economy. And then when these, and no, we're not saying when these, that's wrong. But when the foreigners come over and then they see the opportunities and then they see that a lot of the laws don't apply to them, like the minimum wage. So therefore it makes it easy for them to get a job and so forth and so forth. And then this creates tension within the community. And a lot of them see, guys from outside are coming in, taking advantage of the economic situation. And then the immediate reaction would be, well, you must make it harder for them. But no, it should be that we must make it easier for South Africans to actually compete in the economy and take advantage of it. And I think once we sort that out, I think border control, you don't have to put so many resources into that as a result, because at least then South Africans will be benefiting. Because if many South Africans are benefiting from the economy, they won't really care as much when foreigners come in. But if they can't take advantage of it and they're seeing foreigners taking advantage of it, then it creates tensions.
Absolutely. And to your point, Sara Brown makes a great point, and I actually put her comment on the screen. In fact, Milton Friedman makes the exact same point when he draws a parallel between America, the sort of late 19th century and early 20th century, that had those quote unquote open borders that saw immigrants come to it. Immigrants were coming because they were incentivized by the free markets, the free trade. The idea that they could leave their Western countries where there were laws prohibiting entering one profession or the other, or starting a trade in this or that, and move to America where there's the freedom to actually start anything, build income, build wealth over time, and create family incentives, or rather families. And that was the incentive, rather, that brought people to there. And perhaps a conversation on open borders, maybe I should have it here on the show, should take this into account. Marnus, I want to stretch the question a little bit to you, because it seems as though if you listen to the flavor of this conversation, it all whittles back to the failure of the states to uphold the rule of law when it comes to immigration laws and really the sovereign integrity of the nation state. We have a minister, for example, of public works who quite literally spent millions building a chicken fence, what effectively came to a chicken fence on the border. And then we're surprised when people find it much easier to just cross the border there as opposed to go through a port of entry.
You're quite right. And interestingly enough, we did a documentary a few weeks ago that will be released in the week. We have about 166 neighborhood watch structures across South Africa. And one of our neighborhood structures, I just can't remember the town's name, but it's on the border between South Africa and Zimbabwe. And they said, please, just come and have a look. And if you want to, bring a camera with you. And we did just that. I wish there were a chicken cage. There's nothing. The people simply walk out and about. The police and the military units that's there to try and safeguard it are understaffed. They don't have the right equipment. And the smuggling of contraband in and out, and the robberies that take place in the towns near the border and further south, and that get carried out over that border with no hindrance from anybody, that's scary. But there's even something more scary, and that is the safety factor. If it's so easy for them to smuggle this contraband, unfortunately, up in Africa, it's much easier to acquire an automatic firearm, for instance. And it was quite recently that you could purchase a AK-47 for a bottle of brandy. That's some time ago, maybe it's 2 bottles of brandy now. But that's how easy it is. So on the one side, we're fighting for stricter firearm control in the hands of citizens. But on the other hand, there's non-existing borders. And like Koketso said, if they just have the capability to have that infrastructure again, and to have the people come in according to the immigration legislation. But that doesn't happen. And the items that get smuggled is unfortunately counterproductive for the safety efforts in this country. So yeah, that's a great discussion.
Nzuzo, I want to throw it to you because I think it comes across, Manje, as a conversation of what is versus what is the ideal. The ideal, of course, is a well-defended border, an efficient immigration, process, which I think everybody really wants. And if you listen to the likes of about Operation Dudula, they themselves will say, look, we're not opposed to foreign nationals coming here. We're not opposed to foreign nationals living here. We just want them to do so legally because, and this is where I want you to chime in, we're seeing a proliferation, and I don't have the numbers to quantify it. I'm just going off of what we've been told. We're seeing a proliferation of effectively illegal immigrants, undocumented individuals who enter this country seeking criminal opportunity, quickbacks, effectively. An apt example would have been just a week ago or 2 weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, that shooting that happened in Rosettenville, where the bulk majority of the criminal gang members, that's cash and transit gang members, were from Zimbabwe. It's an uncomfortable topic for a lot of South Africans, but something has to be said about this because ultimately for every foreign national or even local criminal who takes ownership of those illegal guns that are flooding in, it's a South African life that faces the barrel end of that.
Yes, definitely, Sihle, and I cannot agree more. Firstly, I just also want to say that the media, the coverage, the media coverage around Operation Tutuda and organizations that are alike to that, they tend to obviously, for clicks, for more readers, they obviously only cover the things that might have might have the readers react badly to it, rather than what actually was said and the facts and the contents of what was actually said at any of these rallies or speeches. So we need to really separate the issues in that, Operation to do that does not work as essentially an AWB. You know what I mean? I'm against all foreigners and whoever else, whatever foreigners comes into the country, I'm gonna kill. It's not like that. It doesn't act like that. They obviously have an issue with the porous borders that we have. And also, I've heard Mr. Lax, Nkanja Lax, the leader, speaking about also how politicians profit off of the criminal syndicates that these foreigners run. We saw during lockdown how many the tobacco industry, the illegal tobacco industry, was increasing in numbers in terms of profits. We saw many cigarettes crossing the border, coming to South Africa and being sold, and then after the profits being taken over. And many politicians, we might not have them in jail, and many politicians also profited over that. And I think that's the issue that really happens when you have open borders. You let criminal syndicates come into the country. You let these criminal syndicates run all types of crimes. I've heard in some of the streets of Joburg that the drugs that they sell, they actually come from different parts of Africa. They are actually transported via truck into South Africa as well as via flight as well. So these criminal syndicates are growing, and also politicians are involved, and that's the biggest problem. There's no incentive to actually create safer borders, more secure borders, because at the end of the day, politicians also want to eat. And we've heard that many times. And we've also seen many documentaries, many investigations into, how we saw with that, who's the minister now? David Mahlobo. He's been accused of actually running his own syndicate in terms of rhino horns. That's an allegation. I'm not going to say it's fact, but it's an allegation that has also been put against him. And he's eating off of that. Many politicians also eat off the like we said, we see this with this legislation, the political how they eat off the political coverage in a sense, because once they place this type of legislation into law, they get more votes, and essentially they feed off of indirectly from these open borders. And I think that that's the issue that many South Africans have with this thing is that there's actually an incentive to not do anything about the open borders. There's incentive to increase the number of foreigners into the country. Even in health, I speak to some of my friends in the health industry, and they say that sometimes they find foreigners being the ones asking for healthcare. Foreigners that can't even speak English, foreigners that don't even have identity documents, and they're the ones that are actually taking services. Well, I wouldn't say taking services away from South Africans, but essentially also using services that South Africans should be also be giving to as well. So that's an issue that a lot of South Africans have, and it has to be fixed. But there's no incentive to fix it, and that's the problem. We could have, if there was no incentive, then after that we'd actually be able to fix this issue. But there's no incentive. I've seen it. I've seen how politicians just continue just barraging on about this legislation. I'm pretty sure we're going to speak about it now. But this legislation is very bad in the sense that it doesn't actually fix anything. It's not going to fix anything, and it's actually going to make it more difficult for us to actually find skilled individuals from other countries. Skilled foreigners that actually want to actually bring their skills to society. It'll be much more harder to advertise our economy and our jobs to them, because ultimately for them, it's like, well, I thought there's also as a country that was open to foreigners, but now that you're saying that, like, I'm coming only fifth in line just because of from where I come from, then what's the point of me bringing skills? Then after that, we're gonna lose in that sense as a South African nation. We're gonna lose. Our economy will lose big if we have more skilled individuals leaving the country and more skilled individuals not looking at South Africa as one of them, maybe the top 5 economies to come and work in. That's the problem. But I think that we really need to separate these issues and we need to understand what actually is the problem with open borders. We need to understand what's the problem with having undocumented citizens undocumented foreigners in South Africa. We also need to understand that this is also involves a lot of the justice system as well, the police, politicians that are not doing anything but profiting from these syndicates and these open borders. So yeah.
And even as you say this, I must bring in, I think, that piece of law. Let me just quickly find it. Effectively, it's from the Department of Labor, which has formulated what they call a comprehensive national labor migration policy. That's the Employment and Labor Minister Julius Malema unveiling that piece of legislation last week, if I'm not mistaken, late last week. Melissa is saying the policy has been extensively researched and benchmarked against international best practice. But now here's the kicker. It has effectively 4 aims. And Sara, I want to come to you on this. On jobs, number 1, the first is to address South Africans' expectations regarding access to work opportunities, given the worsening unemployment perception that foreign nationals are distorting labor market access. The policy therefore proposes to introduce a quota on the total number of documented foreign nationals with work visas that can be employed. That's on jobs. On small business, aspect number 2, this policy will be complemented by a small business intervention and enforcement, which will list sectors where foreign nationals cannot be allocated business visas. That's number 1. The third element, of course, is the notion of borders. The Department of Home Affairs is also reviewing current legislation and strengthening the Border Management Authority to secure the porous borders. We'll have to wait and see if that comes into fruition. And of course, the fourth and last element, according to the Labour Minister, is on inspections. Messi, the minister, saying his department, together with all relevant authorities, will step up inspections to, quote, enforce existing labor law and immigration legislation, end of quote. Sarah, it seems to me that the state is following that populist trend that we're seeing, and it really is a populist trend, guys. I get the arguments behind it, but it is something which is literally being capitalized by some people in a very populist manner of saying, actually, part of the problem we have are foreign nationals who are undocumented. But seemingly with this policy, it speaks of documented employees that it seems to want to impose a quota on. Documented foreign employees, pardon me.
Look, I get very nervous about anything that increases the state's intervention in the economy at the best of times. But when quotas are involved and the idea of how enforcement would happen, and the very fact that there's a very good chance that this is just be plain unconstitutional, because South Africa, the constitution doesn't provide for the South Africans who live in South Africa, but it covers all the people who live in South Africa. So some of them will be South African and some of them will not be South African. Basically, the requirements, insofar as there are requirements, and in many cases too many requirements for setting up a business or starting a business, they've got to be applied equally. If somebody is not legal and does not have legal status and isn't in the country legally, it is for the Department of Home Affairs to deal with it. For the Department of Labor to try, and I mean, between this and the tightening of BEE legislation, I think they're going to create jobs by creating positions for people in the Department of Labor to be inspectors, to check on all this incredibly onerous and frankly unfair legislation. This is not the way to get things going in this country. It's, if anything, the opposite.
Guys, I don't know if anybody wants to chime in on this, but before I actually do that, guys, we're at the point where the show is meant to end. Perhaps let me ask everybody just to indulge me, please, if possible, with an extra 15 minutes tops, and then we'll shut everything down after that. If that's okay with everybody, please. If not, you're welcome to please hop off. Just let me know in the private chat. Guys, maybe as I begin to taper off this conversation, I don't know if anybody wants to jump in here, but there's something to be said. Okay, Dumo, I see you, brother. I think there's something to be said, perhaps, about, as Sara says, being wary of the danger of government stepping in here, because they will always do so from a populist perspective themselves, but only they have state power to do this, and that can't be a good thing.
Agreed. It's not a good thing, because the problem is that the state, when they introduce these laws, they think that the reason why we're seeing so many foreigners in certain sectors of the economy is because there's no law that's preventing it. No, the reason why it's like that is because there are incentives in place, and there are laws in place that create these incentives, or some would even say perverse incentives. And now if you look at this piece of legislation that Tula Singisi wants to bring in, it's not going to solve the problem at all, because people are going to find their way around it somehow. So, for example, if they say that you need to have so many that are South Africans, then they're going to get fake IDs. But then the thing is that now if they get fake IDs, well, then they have to follow the labor regulations, which are also incredibly difficult. Well, what's going to happen? Then businesses are just not going to look for human labor, which will then be worse for everybody. So the problem is that the government is not looking at the root cause. The root cause of these tensions is all the current labor regulations in place. It makes it incredibly difficult for South Africans to take advantage of the economy. They need to release that first. They need to release those regulations, or, well, not even release them, just get rid of them, right? And then we will start to see better outcomes. But they're not doing that. And now they're tightening their fist even further and further and further. And at some point, it's going to collapse. I mean, it can only go so far.
Yeah, Koketso.
Yeah, I mean, just on that, I'm of a slightly different view, I guess. So I work in IT, right? And there's this principle of you can build the most secure system in the world with all the fail-safes and all the additional layers of security as you want to. But at the end of the day, everything comes down to if someone gives away their password, then it's tickets. And it's the exact same principle here, where you've got government trying to address policy issues with additional policies, or fix the problem with a big bandage called regulation. But at the end of the day, you can do all of that. But if you don't have an adequate, in South Africa's instance, an effective Home Affairs, Department of Home Affairs, then it's pointless. You're just building layers and layers and layers of quote unquote security while not addressing the root problem. And so you will always spin around this vortex in this circle. But until that's actually sorted, we are going to keep having this conversation, maybe with different words and new terminology in later years, but it's the exact same conversation.
Guys, I must move us on to that final topic for the evening. We've really run out of time, pardon me. We're speaking about ever-increasing government control of aspects of things. Guys, effectively dubbed the Internet Censorship Bill, that's the controversial Film and Publications Amendment Bill, was passed, or signed into law rather, this week and rather quietly, by Cyril Ramaphosa, the Buffalo man himself. Pardon me, let me just quickly read this excerpt here. The Film and Publications Amendment Bill, known as the Internet Censorship Bill by some of its own opponents, aims to introduce a number of changes, including harsher rules to protect children from disturbing and harmful content, and to regulate the online distribution of content such as films and games. This, of course, is referring to revenge porn and hate speech and the like. However, there is another element where it effectively gives the Film and Publications Board, this is a body that is legislated under this legislation, effectively bureaucrats. These are not people who are elected by anybody. It gives them the power to actually decide now, even content on social media like Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, or the like, they actually get the power to decide what can and can't stay, and even have the power to take it down and fine you for it. Dumo, how are we not seeing the danger in this?
It's interesting that a lot of people in the mainstream media did not cover it, or let's just say they didn't give it enough coverage. I felt it didn't get the coverage that it deserved, because these the Films and Publications Board now has a lot of rights. They have a lot of power. They can literally check any post on social media, and if it's deemed to be the wrong post, or if you haven't got it signed off by them, then they can take it down. And I think that why this is a problem is that I think what these guys want to do is emulate China. I think what they want to do is go after the big social media companies that allow people to actually upload content onto their sites with very little verification. And as a result of that, what they want to do is they want these big social media companies to leave the country and to not operate in South Africa, or not allow their services to be used in South Africa. And then it creates a gap in the market for a social media company. And then obviously that's going to be an ANC cadre type company, where again, in that company, when you want to use that that platform, you're going to have to give things like your ID number, where you live, and so forth and so forth. I think that's the ultimate goal of all of this. But I mean, but I just think this is not a practical solution, because I mean, if you look at, a TikTok video, for example, are you telling me that now these guys are going to be managing like close to hundreds of thousands of uploads a day in South Africa, and those things need to get an age restriction and so forth? It's ridiculous, it's impractical, and we can see the end game here. All they just want is to control the economy. They're getting direction from the CCP, and they're like, hey, wouldn't it be nice if we could control the internet like the CCP? But the reality is that South Africa is not like that. We are a country that admires free speech and protects it, and I hope this gets challenged constitutionally.
Absolutely. I'm going one step then saying I hope. I will say this: I will back any organization that takes this particular piece of legislation to court. I quite physically will back any organization, and I will put this to South Africans in an episode of the BDL show. Do they believe the states should have the power to regulate and effectively decide what can and can't go on their own social media? So look out for that. That'll be an episode of the BDL show this Wednesday. Nzuzo, I want to throw it to you for a moment, and then Sara. There's a fear here, and I actually highlighted it in this particular article that I got this from. A Dominic Cow, who specializes in a specialized legal firm, Ellipsis. said that the bill is, in and of itself, is actually badly written. He added that the introduction of the bill means that there is a definite potential for abuse in terms of the infringement of free speech. This, of course, is a foundational right that South Africans all have. It's in the Constitution's Bill of Rights. And it goes on to say, one of my big objections here is that if I upload something which someone else finds objectionable and they think it's hate speech, they'll be able to complain to the FPB. That's what this Cal lawyer says. If the FPB, he continues, says thinks the complaint is valid, they can lodge a takedown notice and have the material removed. The last comment he makes is that it's actually quite problematic because the FPB, which is appointed by government, should not be making decisions as to what is and isn't allowed speech under the SA Constitution. You know, Nzuzo, even as I say this, we can foresee a situation where the FPB, filled with effectively officials likely appointed or deployed, as the ANC put it, by the ANC, don't have the power to censor everything or to go through everybody's social media. But you can bet your bottom dollar that if a party like the ANC looks at my content, for example, you know, a classically liberal, libertarian, conservative channel, here's something they don't like, could say, no, this is the kind of thing that must be taken off. FPB, do something about it. It could actually be something used to go after their political opponents.
Yeah, man. You know, that actually wows me even more about Manpatria because, come on, how many times do we tease and make fun of, you know, people like Sufi and Beki Tele? You know,
every week, Beki.
You see, it's a daily thing. So I just think to myself, what could happen to our channel and many other more channels that essentially criticize, rightfully so, many politicians which make part of the ANC. It's just a shock. This Amendment Act is actually it just flies in the face of actually constitutionalism entirely. You know, firstly, it's gonna obviously infringe on hate speech, on free speech, and also another thing is that it's gonna be impossible to implement, and that's something that's essentially goes against the rule of law, and rule of law must be clear, succinct, and it also must be practical at the same time. It can't just be words on a piece of paper. It can't just be what one politician thinks, and then after to the 60 million people outside there, you know, it's not practical. How many times do we share videos? How many times do we share pictures with each other across the internet, across the country? It's going to be impossible to implement. And I see from certain provisions in the legislation, in this legislation, such as, you know, Section 18, which essentially says that any film, any video that you guys send, you must submit it first to the FPB, which is the Film and Publication Board. Then it also says you must register. If you're gonna send a video to anyone on WhatsApp, even on WhatsApp, you have to register with the FPB, and obviously that comes with a fee and forms that you must fill in. Dude, come on, because this is actually gonna work. What is this actually gonna work even in rural South Africa? Like, come on, this is not gonna work. And as Sarah was talking about it, Section 24 says that, oh no, we're reading from the article, which essentially says that if someone else complains about the image that I've actually sent, and it says that it's hate speech, and the FEB finds it actually valid, that complaint, they'll fine you on two fronts. Firstly, they'll fine you because it's hate speech, but they'll fine you also because you didn't send it in the first place to the FPB for it to be checked. And that's the draconian laws that I'm talking about. That's the stupidity and impracticality of this law, is that how do you implement such a law? And I was listening to the acting chief. As always, it's always acting. It's never permanent, but it's an acting chief of the FPB who said that, you know, we're trying to promote the values of the Constitution, and we're trying to ensure that we stop child pornography and hate speech and whatever. But if he failed to tell the journalist that I'm going to be the one who decides whether it's hate speech, I'm going to be the one, along with my friends who are part of the committee which decides whether your stuff is AFP, is hate speech. I'm going to be the one that actually tells you whether or not it's hate speech, and I'm going to remove it. And even if Twitter doesn't believe, agree with me, I'm going to make sure that they remove it. That's how far these guys' powers are, essentially, when it comes to this legislation. And it's definitely going to go to the Constitutional Court. It's definitely going to be struck down. Certain provisions are going to be removed because it's insanity. This is not. And another thing that I have an issue with is that it comes before the fact. Most crimes, you commit the crime, then the cops come after you, or they come after the fact. You never have a situation where, or you rarely have a situation where you have to go before the fact. So tell the person, I'm about to commit a crime, and then after that, have them do whatever necessary in terms of, it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense, and it's not gonna pass constitutional muster. But just lastly, I ask myself, this president of ours, they say he has an LLB degree. Whenever he signs laws, does he not read it? Like, does he not read it and think to himself, is this thing actually going to work? What I'm reading is actually going to be practical? Is it actually going to be implementable? Because what if I saw that thing? I'll go to the toilet and wipe my ass with it. Like, bro, like, guys, go back to the drawing board and fix this thing, because it's not gonna work. It's definitely not gonna work. But the people who are celebrating at this are the lawyers who now have created a new niche in the laws, in the legal field, who are going to be the ones representing many citizens who are going to be taken to the FPB board for complaints. So yeah,
I want to stay with you for a moment, and I'll come to Marnus. Or did I say I'll come to Sara? Sorry, I've forgotten a little bit. Can you imagine? You guys host a Manpatria show. Can you imagine Big Daddy Liberty show, morning show, shorts, Manpatria show, all of us appearing at the FPB, submitting proposed episodes, and maybe in one of my applications say, the Minister of Police will be called an asshat in episode 5. Is that okay? The Minister of Cooperative Governance will be called Buffalo Bill in this. Like, guys, this thing is asinine in its nature. It's designed, I really do see it, as a means of controlling what those who are opposed, or those who are opposed to the state often say about those in leadership. Can I just quickly do Marnus? Nzuzo, I'll come to you first,
okay,
and then Marnus, and then Sara.
Okay, I just wanted to say just two things. I think, firstly, Sihle, man, I'm gonna ask the FEB to actually create a young room specifically for Manpatria Morning Shot BDL, so that we can chill and be like, yo, Sihle, what you here for, man? Man, I called Mr. Balula an idiot. I'm sorry, man. You know what I mean? That's gonna literally be our conversations when we meet each other in the hallways of the FPB. But anyway, another thing is that, and you guys touched on it earlier, why the mainstream media is not talking about this. Provisions in the legislation also say that if you're not part of the, I forgot what it's called, but essentially the regulatory body for press,
the press ombudsman.
Yes, the press council, something like those guys. Yeah, if you're part of them, or you're part of the ICASA, essentially like the broadcasting guys, you guys are essentially excluded from this legislation. Your guys' system is entirely based on what
therein lies the grift.
Yes, your regulatory bodies actually do, which is essentially saying, dude, I'm only gonna make sure that people who are in the mainstream are making money. Alternative media don't make nothing, and they silenced, as was the case in apartheid. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to say.
Absolutely. Marnus, can I just come to you? Quick comment?
Yeah, I think the panel summed it up perfectly. Won't be able to do much better. But it's interesting to see the government are so power hungry. If you look at the legislation that they imposed recently, look at POPI legislation, for instance, there's internet censorship bill, the hate speech legislation, and the proposed amendments to the Firearms Control Act. It's like Koketso said, it's unpractical. It can't be implemented, and they want to over-regulate to try and grab as much power as possible. They have this map, but they don't know how to read it. So it's going to be quite interesting to obviously, but you'll be happy to know we have a team on the specific bill or act, and we are dissecting it, and we will discuss it with council, and obviously, if there's in any chance a way, we will end up in the prosecution court.
Absolutely. Just on a light note, excellent comment there by Mark de Villiers. I might just do that, Mark. Sorry, let me come to you, and then I'll have Koketso wrap us up on this particular topic. We've been prosecuting the issue that this will obviously be used by those in power to effectively try and stifle, free speech. But there's something to be said here, and Marnus actually raises it. There is a concerted drive, an agenda, if you will, by politicians in this country to construct a legal environment that effectively controls not only all aspects of society, but even thought. The idea that certain ideas are allowed and certain ideas are not. And there is not only a social pressure they'll create, but a legal framework that can punish you for not only a speech, but certain thoughts even. Sorry, you're muted.
Sorry. Let's put it this way: if you know what they say about not attributing to malice what can be attributed to stupidity. Well, this particular piece of legislation, the reason more wasn't made of it by the media was because the first we heard of it was the day it was signed, and the reason for that was because there was a problem with the government gazette printers. No one got a copy. There wasn't nothing available until he signed it. So I actually have one question. Does anyone know what Fikile Mbalula is doing in Ukraine?
Who knows? Who knows?
Maybe the FPB should have told us about that before he went.
No, it's definitely a creeping phenomenon, but I don't think it's something that the ANC can actually keep control of.
Yeah. Koketso, I'm going to ask you to wrap us up here. We've run out of time completely. Maybe to summate. I'm concerned, though. I mean, we laugh and we make fun of this topic, but really, it's quite a serious one because we don't really know, at least in my case right now, having not done the research, I don't know who sits on the FPB, the Film and Publication Board. I don't know what biases they bring to that organization. And I will not know necessarily because these people are not voted for or voted in, rather, by South Africans. There's no democratic means by way in which they're brought in into office. These are bureaucrats chosen by politicians. And these are the sort of people now who will literally have the power to say, no, Koketso, you can't do this. In fact, let me go one step further. Not only can you not do this, I'm going to impose a fine on you of as much as 150,000 rand, or even imprison you for 8 months. This is quite literally an attack on the freedoms of South Africans. It's not a laughing matter.
Yeah, and there's that saying, yet another African country. You criticize the president, and before you know it, you disappear, and your family never sees you again. That's effectively what I believe the government is pseudo trying to get to. We must be terrified of saying anything negative about the ruling party, the country's executive, a minister, the president, etc., etc. But I mean, just on that topic, right? And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I'll make the same example as I've done so in the past, where the need is identified by bureaucrats to say that, right, initially this was tabled as a means to curtail the spread of the spread of revenge porn, etc., etc., and then throw in there some spice like as a means to contributing towards the reduction in kidnapping and child abduction, etc. So that's initially what it was sold as. Let's actually stop this revenge porn thing from becoming a thing, and let's put in some legislation that will make it difficult to impossible for someone to do it without any form of legal consequence. Yeah, at the surface, you dig in a little bit deeper, and they are going for and largest any and all forms of media. But the example I want to make here is that my problem really with the state is that even when they want even when they want to, actually address such issues, which are issues to be addressed, etc. Even when they are benevolent about it and they want to actually fix a growing problem, they then don't call in actual, I don't want to say experts, but people who know what they're doing. They don't want to call in the expertise at an advisory level who would then give them the solid piece of advice in terms of a way forward. The biggest example we've seen recently is with the whole e-tolls thing, followed also by the whole unabridged passports issue at when you cross the border. They didn't bring in the experts. They didn't bring in someone like a business analyst who then come in and say, right, here's the pros and cons, or something as simple as a SWOT analysis. And so when I look at this FPB issue, how have they factored in something like a live stream, which we are doing right now? How are we supposed to how are we supposed to actually, what are we supposed to ask for permission before we do a live stream where we present an agenda of items to be discussed, complete with a whole script of who's going to say what and when? I don't believe, I don't believe they actually got in some experts to have a look at some of this. It almost seems like the law was drafted by people who don't know how to make a WhatsApp voice call, for example, or understand the intricacies of how voice packet data is then stored on a server, encrypted, etc., and is decrypted on the other side, and is then played back as audio again. I genuinely don't think they've employed people who understand all of these technical aspect things, but they've gone ahead and signed the law into law anyway. And I'm really, I think all of us here, I am really rooting for someone to take this on. I heard Marnus say that, Afriforum is looking into something like this. I didn't realize that it is within their domain. I realize it's probably outside the domain of what Outer would do. But heads up to Dear SA, Sakalicha, whoever else wants to get their hands dirty with this. You've got my support as well. This is actually ridiculous, but it does show the level of ineptitude in our current government, and that they don't understand that which they sign into law. And this isn't the first time. And all the other times when it's happened and they were actually told against it, they didn't listen either. So you've got people that won't even learn from their own mistakes. Even if they don't view it as a mistake. You've got people that won't even learn from past experiences in terms of signing very modern progressive laws into play that are actually, at least for now, impossible to effect, and impossible to actually, to actually build capacity for, if I can put it like that. So anyone else who wants to challenge this, you've got my vote.
Absolutely. And with that being said, I was about to say, with that being said, a massive thank you to everybody. As we always do on the show, guys, very briefly, I'm going to go around. How do the folks reach you or your organization? And that's it, actually. Marnus, how do the folks reach you on social media if you want to be reached, of course? But how do people get in touch with Afriforum?
Very easy. All of the information is on the website, www.afriforum.co.za. The people that work there are there, the contact numbers are there, the email addresses are there. And if they want to speak to me directly, the office number is there. They can simply ask to speak to me and they'll put them through. Excellent.
So that is Marnus Kamfer, of course, from the civil society organization Afriforum, doing excellent work. Look out for, actually, let me not spoil anything. Afriforum, Marnus, pardon me, from Afriforum. Koketso, how do the folks reach you on your socials?
So I'm mostly active on Twitter. That's Koketso Resane on Twitter. I'm a nice guy most of the time, but if you're not nice to me, I will bite back. So fair warning. Otherwise, find me on Manpatria. That is on our podcast every Monday at 7 p.m. And I am still building great things, but as soon as it's ready, or as soon as there's more than 24 hours in a day, you'll see that go live as well.
As he says, he will bite back. Wolf, Kokotso, we see you, homie. Nzuzo, how do the folks reach you on your social media?
Yeah, man. You can reach me on Twitter, Nzuzo Khati. And you can also reach me on Instagram as well. Please understand that I just don't accept anybody, especially on Instagram. So please announce yourself. But nonetheless, you can find me on those platforms, and you can also find me on Manpatria Mondays as well, live streaming with Koketso and Dumo. And we'd like to hear your guys' comments. Looks like we're gonna, our days are numbered. So please, guys, join us as soon as possible. And yeah, man, we'd like to hear from you guys. But yeah, man, sometimes I'll be on the PDL, and yeah, man, sometimes I'll be on other shows as well. But yeah, man, thank you for having me on the show. See you.
Excellent, my brother. Good to have you on. Sara, how do the
Yes.
folks find you on social media? I'm hoping that's an option now. A shake of the head says it all. But how do
No,
the
it's
folks
not,
find
it's
you on
not
Daily
entirely
Friend?
that. It's very complicated. So I'm going to stick with the information for Daily Friend, which puts out all those opinions that the Film and Publications Board would love to get hold of. And it's dailyfriend.co.za is our website, is our new daily opinion portal. And you can get the best way to get hold of me is info@dailyfriend.co.za.
Excellent. Dumo, the FSB are busy rubbing their hands together. Yes. Like Nancy Pelosi. They're rubbing their hands like flies together. We're going to get those two black right-wingers, Manpatria and Big Daddy. Chief, how do the folks get in touch with you?
Right, I'm on Twitter at Dumo Denga. We also have we also on Twitter as well, Manpatria at Manpatria_ZA, and also we have a website manpatria.com. And as mentioned by Nzuzo and Koketso, we are live every Monday at 7 o'clock. So please come check us out there. It's a really cool show. You'll enjoy it.
Absolutely. With that being said, a big thank you to all of my guests as I get them off screen. Thanking you, dear viewer, for watching this episode. I know it's gone a bit longer, but hey, that's the nature of Liberty and Friends. This is my one and only long format show. Big thanks again to my guests, and thank you for watching. A reminder, I'll see you again on Wednesday for the Big Daddy Liberty show. And I might be trialing something new this week as we have this makeshift studio now in place. I might start doing podcasts again and coming to you every afternoon at 5 p.m. Maybe on your lunch, your drive time. A short synopsis of the news day from a BDL perspective with the hottest interviews and the most compelling analysis you will get nowhere else. With that being said, thank you once again for watching the show. I will see you on Wednesday for the BDL show. And until then, a reminder, never trust a commie.